I'm very proud to have Pam and Gary Chambers here this evening. Many of you know them, of course, from our own parish here at St. Francis. But they've been doing something which is very important and, depending on situations, very timely. Has anyone here ever known anyone, friend, family member, even a stranger, who has ever dealt with issues of dementia of some kind? Anybody? Right. It is a topic which is very important, but it's not only about the person, it's also about the caregiver. And this is what tonight is about. How do you care for and provide the resources and support for the caregivers? And that is what Pam and Gary are going to talk about. It's a special program we are actually going to be offering here. I'll let them talk more about the kind of training. They have been trained and certified not only to lead a course, but to be instructors to teach how to lead the courses. So this is it's a very detailed program, and I'm just going to just leave it and let them talk.
Good. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks, Father Warren. We're real pleased to have this opportunity to share this with you. Okay. Good. Thank you. And thank you for your participation and attendance this evening, because it is something that's
Microphone, please. Oh, microphone.
Got to get closer to it.
We'll get it going.
I'm going to eat this thing if we don't look out here.
That's okay. Bring the whipped cream.
Okay.
There.
I'll just stand right here. How about that? Again, this is something that's near and dear to our hearts. We have some personal experience with Stress Busters program over time, and it has been a significant and positive thing for us, and we're more than happy to want to share it with others and provide it to the Green Valley community. I think it's interesting. First, let me ask, how many of you know someone who is a family caregiver to a family member who has dementia or a chronic illness? Raise of hands. Okay. Notice a sizable number of us already are at that point of some sort of caregiving and some sort of interaction with dementia as a caregiver. From our First Lady, Rosalind Carter, she indicates, and I think correctly, that there are 4 kinds of people in the world. Those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those whose will be caregivers, and those who will need a caregiver. So it's not something that's not going to touch our lives in all likelihood. It's something that's there. It may have already touched your life. It's just something that is there, and it's going to be part of it. Just a few things that are statistics to go along with this piece from Rosalind Carter. Family members are the primary source of care and support with people with dementia. And the little acronym, and I forget it all the time, it's ADRD. It's Alzheimer's. Anyway, the point being, if you've got Alzheimer's, which, it's out there, you have to think of it as a continuum. We like to separate Alzheimer's a little bit from other forms of dementia, and it's not necessarily the case because of the things that show up. They're very, very similar, and they're very, very much alike, depending on which sort of dementia that you have. And so when we say, well, Alzheimer's is over here, it's not so much. It's part of that continuum, part of the spectrum.
And the end result, regardless of what kind of dementia you have, is the same. And really, you can't diagnose dementia until the person's dead and they do an autopsy. Right now, when they say, oh, she's got Alzheimer's or she's got vascular or whatever, they're making a guess because they can't diagnose it until they have an autopsy. Exactly what kind of dementia it is.
70% of the people with dementia, some form, live at home and are cared for by family and friends. That's a significant number of people that are not in a facility. They're at home. They're with loved ones. These caregivers usually are middle-aged, adult children, or older spouses which sacrifice their own health to care for a loved one who is battling with this debilitating disease. So it's something that just hits the family. And the next point, I think, is really interesting, that caregiving is an experience for which most people are not prepared. It's not something that we have in part of our learning experience or our schooling or any of that kind of thing. It's something that shows up and you're it, and you're part of it. And that's, in essence, what is a lot of the struggle right there. It kind of comes along and it creeps up, and as it progresses, it doesn't get better. It just gets more and more. So stress involved, a lot of things involved with that Stress Busters does address.
So I want to talk about our connection with Stress Busters, where it started. Well, it started in 2014. And we were living in San Antonio, Texas. My mother had been living in Tennessee. My dad had died in the early 90s. We were lucky that she found love again. And when Bob died, we had all decided that Mom would move to Texas. And she did, because she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia. And then she and Bob both told us she doesn't have that. And I told Gary, I said, that's fine. Let's say she doesn't have that. They're in Tennessee, we're in Texas. I can't do a thing about it. Well, she did have it. And so we got her to move to San Antonio, had her in assisted living, did great for about, a little over a year, I guess. And then, assisted living doesn't have the locked facilities. And my mother started the wandering, which can be a very dangerous part of dementia. And so anyway, she did start wandering. And so they said, we can't keep her here because, she can walk out the front door and off she's gone. So anyway, we had to move her to a memory care facility. In fact, we moved her once, and then we moved her twice. But that is one of the hardest things in the world to do, I think, is to have to move someone that you love into a memory care facility. The thing I will tell you, though, is after Stress Busters and everything, is it was the best thing in the world for her. Because all of a sudden she was singing, she was talking. I mean, they were talking with each other. We had no idea a lot of times what she and her friends at the facility were saying, but they knew exactly what they were saying. And, I mean, she was happy. And she wasn't being told, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do this. She was being told, yes, you can do this. Yes, you can do that. But anyway, so moved her to that. After in dealing with this, I told Gary, I said, I might need to go to some kind of facility myself because I am not doing well. And I wasn't doing well at all. Both Gary and I are only children, and luckily, my mother, as well as his parents, had set up the power of attorney for us, and Gary was the backup, medical and financial. So if that's not done and you're going to be a caregiver, then make sure it does get done, because without it, you can't do anything. But then I found out about Stress Busters, and I attended a group, and there were 8 of us in that group. And what it did is it positively changed my life in a very positive way. It changed my personal life, and Gary is glad it changed our home life, because that was not real good at the time. Very stressful. And then it changed my relationship with my new mom. And I learned how to accept that and not to know, just to accept that I'm going to meet somebody new each time I go see her, and that's okay. The other thing is I still stay connected with one of the guys I went through. His name is George, and his wife had dementia. And I still stay in contact with him and his daughter. And so not only does it help you, but it also builds people that are going through the same thing that you're going through.
In contrast, I guess, a little bit with her experience was mine. Both of my parents had a form of dementia. One was my dad had vascular dementia, and my mom had dementia brought about by anesthesia. She broke her hip, and for 2 years she lived in a fog after that, because of the anesthesia. It's part of the drill. We were warned about that she went under the anesthesia at 84, I'm sorry, and for the final 2 years of her life, she was in that fog. And it was very similar to what we saw with Pam's mom later, and with my dad a little bit earlier than that, with his vascular dementia. But it's something, of course, it doesn't get better, and it only progresses. We were long distance caregivers with my dad. We're about 200 miles away from where they lived in my hometown. And that's a different kind, and I'm trying to give you some more contrast with what caregivers do. Some of them are present and right there, and the stress and the life is right with you, because your caregiver, patient, person is right there with you, and sometimes they're not. And it's a struggle, and it's a challenge when they're not there, and you're going every week or every other week to check on them to be sure that people are getting fed and checks are being written and all those kinds of things. And if you've been in that experience or have had that experience, you know how different it is from being an on-site caregiver. My mom, I mentioned, when she broke her hip, she moved to San Antonio after my dad's death. And it was just hard to imagine that after something that was successful in the way of surgery, that there was a big old downside when she began to continue with the fog and go deeper into it.
And there also wasn't a choice in the surgery. It wasn't like, well, let's just let her have a broken hip. And the surgeon and I, we talked about that. He said, this is the possibility of what can happen, but there's not a choice. And so in caregiving, there are a lot of different interrelated concepts. So you've got the caregiving in the middle, and you've got all these different things in your life that are coming in and being part of that. And one of it is stress. And stress is when you have the inability to cope with a perceived, and it can be real or imaginary threat to one's mental health. You know, your emotional, your spiritual, your well-being. And that's what stress is. It affects all parts of your body. And examples of it, you can have increased drinking, you can overeat, you can undereat, you can not sleep, you can sleep too much. But it just affects every part of your being. The next one is coping. And on the coping is how the person manages demands and emotions that are placed on their environment and on their personal relationships, and how they cope with that. And the Stress Busters program is written to help caregivers, family caregivers, deal with coping with the caregiving. And how do you cope with the differences in the relationships, the differences in your environment? Because a lot of times caregivers are isolated. They're not invited, to different places. A lot of times they feel isolated, and sometimes they are isolated.
And that kind of segues into the family dynamics piece, because many times that family is not really comfortable with the whole idea of one of their members being part of a caregiving entity or the caregiver themselves, and they don't know what to do with that. And that's kind of what Pam was saying. You get isolated. Some of you, I remember having a job that I was the only one that was in this position, and the buck stopped with me. And there wasn't anybody to talk to about it. There wasn't anybody to go to get a little bit of support for it. And I sometimes think about caregivers in that same way, especially even in their own family. The family dynamics at times do not allow you to get that support that you need. And you do things differently. You maybe don't use as much time as you used to with things with your children or with your spouse or with your brothers and sisters. That kind of thing kind of goes by the wayside because you've got a job, and it's a full-time, all-time job of being a caregiver.
And then a person's culture also affects the family dynamics and how, depending on what culture you're in.
And that is true. And that's the fourth piece here of culture. And if you think about our society and how we work with things, mental health and mental illness and anything that goes along with it is a real struggle for us to work with. We even have a hard time funding those kinds of things in our society that would help us be better and be a more positive support for others and for ourselves. And we struggle with that. So caregivers get a kind of a double whammy with this, from family to our society and on and on and on with the stress that comes from it.
So you have all these these interrelated concepts. Caregiving's in the middle, and all of them are going up and bombarding the caregiver as well as each other. So they affect the caregiver and they also affect each other. And so it's, how does the caregiver handle the stress? How do they cope? How do they handle the family dynamics? How do they handle the culture that they live in? And what you want them to be able to do is handle it in a positive manner, in a manner that they can relieve their stress. And then once they can relieve their stress, then they find they can cope better, they can deal with their family better. I know Gary can attest that once I went through it, I was much easier to deal with. Although he would not agree with that sometimes, even now. Anyway, all of that is...
Not out loud. I wouldn't do that.
But all of those affect the family caregiver.
One thing we like about Stress Busters that really has attracted us, and hopefully it is a draw for you as you hear about this particular program. It's evidence-based. It's got a lot of research and a lot of data behind it. It's not something that some guys up in a medical center decided that they could put together and do. They had it vetted. It has lots and lots of information behind it. There's an evaluation before and after the program with many participants, not only professionals that are in the business, but caregivers. And how did this affect them, and was it a positive experience? You'll notice the logo there is for administration on aging. This administration, this organization actually funded part of this because they thought it was such a good program and so valuable. So that's a pretty good stamp of approval when that particular group says it's okay. Just so you know, too, we're part of a growing family with Stress Busters. We're the first time offerings in, hopefully we'll expand from that, but in Arizona this is the first time that it has reached here. You'll notice that it's around and about in the States, not everywhere, but with our training we were with people from Illinois and Michigan and a number of other states, and Michigan will be another one of those places that turns green here with the advent of Stress Busters in Michigan. So it's a coming thing. It's something that we can spread in a number of ways. We can have groups as master trainers. We can do groups ourselves, Stress Busters groups, but we can also train other facilitators. So if there are a couple of folks that would be interested in that, we are very interested in talking to you about you being able to offer the program as well as we do. So.
Well, and on that, we would be support for you. You would not be out there on your own. So how did it get started? Okay, so first of all, in 1996, what this group decided is they started one-on-one with relaxation therapy. Thank you. With family caregivers of members of their families who had Alzheimer's. And so they worked with them one-on-one, and what they did is they taught them simple relaxation strategies. They taught them breathing, how you let out your breath, you relax yourself through your breathing, and then they also use guided imagery where you close your eyes and you imagine you're someplace and they'll walk you through it and you get real relaxed. Because one of the ways that you can get rid of your stress is through relaxation. The caregivers in this particular, the one-on-one, what they wanted was more education. They wanted more education on stress management, and they wanted it in a small group. So then, phase 2 came. And phase 2 started in 2001. And so they had small group settings of 6 to 8 people in a group. The sessions last for 9 weeks, an hour and a half each week. The participants each receive a personal workbook at no cost. And they share in the group. And there's also 2 facilitators in each group. So then in 2010, another part of Stress Busters, because the family caregivers that had family members who had chronic illnesses were saying, we need some help as well. And so then they adapted the dementia program to also fit where it's chronic illness. And so this was entirely funded by the Administration of Aging whenever they did this one. And so the only difference in it, the chapters are the same except for chapter 4, because the relaxation techniques and everything are the same throughout it. The questions that you're asking, because you're dealing with the caregiver. You're not helping the person who has dementia or the person who has a chronic illness. You're focusing only on the caregiver. But in chapter 4, in the dementia group, you would talk about dementia. In chapter 4, in the chronic illness group, you would talk about chronic illnesses such as, cancer or Parkinson's disease. We could go on and on. But that's the major difference in the two programs. And they also have their own book. So this would be the dementia book, and you're more than welcome to look at it afterwards. And then this would be the chronic illness workbook. And so you may be able to change the stressors in your life. You may not be able to change the stressors in your life, but you can choose how you react to them, and you can choose how you respond to them.
And I think as human beings, we have a hard time with that sometimes. We don't change gears very well, and we get kind of going down with blinders on, and we think, well, this is the only way to do it. But you do have choices, and one of the things that the program works with is your idea of choice and how you have the opportunity to do things differently for your own well-being. Talking about what happens in these small groups, there's confidentiality in the group. It is what's said there stays there. It is for that group of 6 to 8 only. There's focus on the caregiver, and again, you notice what Pam said about that booklet, and all of the information in there is caregiver, 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 except for one little chapter which says maybe we ought to talk a little bit about what brought us together here. And that's that idea of dementia, and kind of some ideas about it that maybe you already know, or maybe you need just a little refresher on, and that's just that one part of it. So the focus is on the caregiver. That's the whole reason we've come together. There are weekly stress management techniques introduced, so it's not one thing or two things. It's every week something comes about that is useful. That's something that you take, and we'll practice that during the sessions, so that you've got something that you can go home and use. Participants are asked to have a little homework just to be prepared for the next session, and it's not big, it's not great, it's not excessive. It's something that will just get you ready for the next steps in the next session of an hour and a half.
So when a participant completes the program, they'll have 8 different stress management techniques, and they can use all of them, or they can use the one or ones that work best for them. And so how do these groups work? Well, first of all, there's 2 facilitators, and one of my facilitators in San Antonio, Catherine, I still keep in contact with. And so we talked to each other, and she was excited that we were going to bring the program to Arizona. But there's 2 facilitators. They guide the conversation. They make sure everyone has a chance to talk, and they listen. And then there are 6 to 8 participants, and they share in the discussion. Anytime we ask a question or we're talking about something, any participant can pass. If they're not comfortable in talking about something, they don't have to talk about that. And then they focus on themselves and their well-being. If they need to talk after the group to the facilitators about something privately, that can also be done, because there'll always be time after the group for the facilitators to listen to someone if they need just some privacy to talk about something. So what Stress Busters is not is that it's not a class, and it's not a counseling group. And so what it is a multi-component program that's designed for family caregivers. And so it focuses on support of the caregivers by nurturing the caregivers, providing support for them, giving them some problem-solving skills, getting them to develop problem-solving skills as well, giving them education on what stress is, how it affects your body, and then also giving them those stress management techniques of relaxation and coping strategies.
Pam says this comes from her. It's a Pamism. I've had it stated in a number of different ways, but I think it's true, and I think it has some real meaning here with what we're talking about with caregivers. You cannot take care of anyone else until you take care of yourself first. And you think about what's asked of you as a caregiver and what you need to do. You have to be well equipped to be able to do that in a good and healthy way. And so you've got to take care of yourself first. Okay. Are there questions? Are there things that we can help answer? Bill?
Well,
They need it for the recording. Yeah, you were talking about the 6 to 8 participants in these groups. Are those people caregivers themselves, or are they people that are going to learn to help caregivers?
They are family caregivers themselves.
Okay.
Yes, the other people that we will be training would be facilitators, pairs of facilitators, and then they would have their own group that would meet for 9 weeks of family caregivers. Good question.
What did you mean when you said that caregivers can't always go? Some go everywhere or be included in things?
Well, a lot of times caregivers are, what I found is that a lot of times because of the stress in your life and everything that's going on and the care that you have to give to your family member, you may not be able to go shopping with a friend because you've got to take your mother to the doctor. You may not be able to go to lunch with some people because your mother can't go along. There were times that my mother could go to lunch with my friends and I, and then there came a time when she couldn't. And so someone had to be willing to come to the memory care facility, and luckily we had a couple of friends that would do that would come once a week and have lunch with us. And so I didn't feel that, but I did see other people not have that same support. Bobby.
Do these get-togethers of the caregivers take place during the day or in the evening?
Well, when I've talked to some people, thank you. He's kind of tall, but when I've talked to a lot of people is that, and just from my own personal experience, is that when you're a caregiver, usually in the mornings, you need that time to take care of medicine, to take care of getting them dressed, to make sure they've gotten something done. I mean, even if they're living in a nursing home or a memory care facility, you still are the primary caregiver. And so probably it'll be in the afternoon, and it'll be during the day. I don't want caregivers, number one, when you're a caregiver and there's lots of stress, you tend to have more accidents because you're not as alert as what you normally are. And so I would not ask any caregiver to come out at night for something I was having, that we were having. Yes, sir.
Oh, you raised a good point about caregiving is not always in your own home. In my first parish, there was a lady who would go and visit her husband who had Alzheimer's. He was in a nursing home. She would walk, because she didn't have a car, she would walk about a half hour, roughly, if she didn't get a ride to get there, to get to the nursing home. And she went and stayed in most of the day, at least maybe 7 or 8, sometimes 10 hours a day with her husband, Michael. And she did that for 12 years till he died. That's a caregiver, but in a very different location.
Right. And even if your family member lives in a residence or in a facility, then you still are on call 24/7. You know, bottom line. You're still on call 24/7. And if you happen to find a really good, like the last one my mother was in, it was just fabulous the way they took care of her and the one-on-one and how small it was. I can't say enough for that facility. Yes. Oh, can I say something too about what Father Warren just said? Is that when you're a caregiver, especially if someone who has dementia, and they happen to be living in a facility or they happen to be living at your house, they need a schedule. They need to know, and they need to stick to it. And so the hardest thing for me to understand, and finally I did understand after Stress Busters, is that every time that I would go visit my mother, I would disrupt her schedule. And so that didn't help the caregivers that were taking care of her there, the paid caregivers. And so with Gary's help, and plus my mother had paranoia and hallucinations, and she loved Gary, and so there was a time that he had to go with me, because otherwise she would get very angry and hostile toward me, and I would have to get a caregiver and just leave. And so, but if I would bring Gary along, she was really nice, and so that was good. But I learned that I started going once every 2 weeks, because other than that, I broke up her schedule, and that was not good for her.
I was just going to mention that the question about isolation, there's a couple of us I know for sure in this room who had to deal with the isolation of COVID. And people couldn't come to my house. And so it was a lot different than what it is right now.
So one last thing, our next step is going to be, we are got some phone calls out right now to different facilities, trying to set up meetings with them, and we're going to talk with them to get the word out about this. We do need to have a group of 6 to 8, and we're going to start out with the dementia group first, and then after we have that group, then we can train facilitators.
Can you explain what's involved for those who might be thinking about being a facilitator? What kind of training is involved?
Yes. What we're going to do is mirror the master training that we had, that we were fortunate to be part of in February and March. And it's a pretty extensive time. We will be able to shorten it just a bit because it's not a master training. Once they finish, they are facilitators, and they can facilitate the program, but they can't train anybody else. We will be the sole trainers at this point because we took the master training. But it will mirror that, and we will give them as much of that program as we can, as is part of the program. We'll keep it straight to what we got, other than the master part.
Well, and then, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, the facilitators, we will be there for support as well. We'll be there to answer questions. They'll have our phone numbers so they can call us, text us, if they need some help. And when a facilitator first starts out, then we have to be at several of their sessions to see how it's going, to see, if they are struggling some or if they're not struggling some. We have to be at least 2 of them to certify, yes, they're fine to go forward and do that. And, one of the things that one of the people who trained us was Jennifer. Jennifer has been with Stress Busters since its inception. And I got to meet her back in 2014 and the lady who wrote this. And so I was very impressed with both of them. It was good to see Jennifer again, even though it was on Zoom.
Yeah, I got a question. You mentioned dementia, and then you also said something about terminally ill patients or people.
Chronic.
Is the program
Chronic illness.
Chronic illness, and you showed 2 handbooks. So I take it that there's a slight difference between each. Okay, because I don't want you to leave those people out. Like I've got some touching with people with Huntington's disease, and it's a fatal disease, and they need a lot of support also. The other one was on your slide that you had up there. You had multi-states diagrammed, some with the Stress Busters having made it into the state and have programs. But for those states that were not colored in, how do those people get in touch with you? Or how do they work? Or is there a future for those states that were not indicated?
Well, those states will need to contact WellMed in San Antonio, Texas, to get trained. We can't train master trainers. We can't train somebody in, like Washington. I can't remember if that's one of the states that's green or not. But in another state, we can't train a master trainer. Only someone from WellMed, be Jennifer and Tina, who are the lead trainers, can train a master trainer.
And is that some of your information up there?
No, but I can, Washington. But I can give you their contact number if you know somebody in Washington or one of these states that's in white that they would like to have the program. Then I can give you their contact number.
Great. My particular state was Idaho.
Okay.
We'll see. Thank you.
The initial group that you were talking about forming, is that related to parish people, or is that extending beyond our parish family?
It will be for Green Valley.
What I'll be trying to do with Gary and Pam is connect them to the local ministerial that I'm involved in, of all the different denominational churches that get together once a month for a prayer and meeting. And sometime soon, I'm hoping they'll be able to give a presentation to the other church leaders so we can get it established in Green Valley in more than one location. But St. Francis carries the torch.
Home base. And then we have a contact that Gary LeVar got for us at Los Barrios. And La Posada, excuse me. Los Barrios is in San Antonio. But anyway, hopefully we can have a meeting with them next week.
Bernie, and then...
Will you be interacting with the Pima County Agency on Aging as part of this?
Yes, eventually, yes. Because this program also, this is its 4th edition, and the Dementia program is in Spanish. And so that would be very helpful for Pima County.
Thank you.
I had a question about if you are working with the Methodist Church that is now doing a whole series on working with caregivers with dementia.
Oh, are we working with them?
Yes.
No, not right now, we're not. This would probably be separate from what they're doing because this is only these 6, once the group starts, then no one else can join the group. It's just for those 6 to 8 people that start the group because of confidentiality. Did I answer your question?
No, I think she wondered if you would be associating with that church that is doing something with Alzheimer's.
We can meet with them and see. I mean, I don't know what they're doing.
I was going to say, what is it that they're doing?
Yeah.
Like, is it a therapy program? Is it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm not really sure.
This is, it's not this proprietary thing that it's only one spot that you can get this kind of good information or this kind of good support. There's a lot of different things out there. This one just so happens to be one we're very familiar with, and we feel really good about it. And we would certainly welcome some opportunity to talk with them to kind of see what's out there. And there might be a little twist to theirs that's different from ours that might be more useful in one situation than the other. Ours is pretty well across the board with caregivers for dementia, and then the other particular program with chronic illness. So, and theirs may emphasize one or the other or something else. But I'd like to hear what they've got going. Sure,
Gary, I think I could be wrong because I don't know much about the program. It might be learning about specifically about like Alzheimer's and dementia. That's about learning about it. Stress Busters is about caregiver specifically, right. which is a different side of it. However, everything goes hand in hand.
Right, and the caregivers, if you are caregiving somebody who has dementia, you do need to know what it is and what to expect, and be able to change your game face in a split second when you walk in, because you don't ever know what you're going to be dealing with. Yes, Gary?
I think what some people are talking about, there are a number of places there. I know of 3 churches. There's one in La Posada that are support groups. Mm-hmm. There are people that just come together. They usually have a facilitator, but it's just sort of a get-together, pat each other on the back. It's not, they don't have a teaching program, and yours is more of a program that teaches caregivers how to take care of the stress that they're under.
Mm-hmm. Well, we teach by asking questions. And so there'll be questions that we ask at every one of the meetings, and that's why the homework is before, because you'll be surprised at when it asks you something in that booklet and you start writing it down, what comes out. And then that's why you need to do it before the next session, so that when we start that discussion and ask questions, then you can have, because the participants in this particular facilitators get the discussion going and ask the questions, but the participants really run the discussion. Does that answer your question? So yes, but there's a lot of teaching in the questions that we're asking.
I just had a question. The people who developed the program, and maybe you did describe what they did for a living, like you said there were 2 people who wrote this program. What were their professions that led to creating this?
Okay. She was, the one who wrote this, Sherry, she was a nurse practitioner, if I remember correctly, at the University of Texas Health Science Center. And she had done a lot of studying in Alzheimer's, dementia, and seeing that caregivers needed help. And that's where the one-on-one started with her and some other facilitators. And then they wrote the program. There wasn't a program in 1996, a booklet, but the booklet came out in 2001. And that was written, and that was evidence-based. They tried each thing before they put it in the booklet to see, does it work, does it not work, does it help family caregivers, does it not help family caregivers. They did pre- and post-test, they did evaluations, so I hope that helps. She was very knowledgeable, and now she has moved to New Mexico, so she has retired, and that's why it's now with WellMed.
Thank you.
I think you, from what you said, it seems to me that this is mainly for primary caregivers. Is it also for auxiliary caregivers, ones that help out?
It can be for any family caregiver. It doesn't have to be the primary one.
Excuse me. We kind of mentioned that this would have been a very helpful thing. It was just in its infancy in 1996 when my dad died. It would have been a powerful piece for me to be able to sit down with some folks, well, both of us actually, and be able. There's so much power in a group. That group dynamic thing is really something. Yes, it's good to learn a technique, and that's certainly part of it. But the other part of it is to realize that you're not alone, and that you're part of something that my figures are a little bit dated, but there's over 10 million caregivers in the United States now, and I'm sure that has grown since that number was put together, and the number is that I think 1 in 6 is the number that people over 65 that are experiencing some form of dementia, and 1 in 2 over 85 years old are experiencing dementia. So it's very prevalent out there, and it's something that our society, unfortunately, has, because we're living longer, we've got better ways to keep the body alive. Sometimes the mind just kind of lags behind, and that's unfortunate, but it's caused these dementia numbers to shoot up. So it's quite a challenge for us and for a country.
And the other thing is, it's not a natural part of aging. Dementia is not. And the United States, with the world, has started keeping track of it more than it ever has before. So I can't remember when they started keeping track of it. But years ago, I had an aunt in North Carolina that nobody knew what was wrong with her. Well, she had dementia. And, but the doctors didn't know what was wrong with her. Her husband, was her primary caregiver. But nobody knew what was wrong with her, except she was getting lost, not showing up for work, wandering. She wasn't the Polly that she used to be.
Any last question? Any last question? Okay. Well, Pam and Gary, thank you. If anyone wants to talk with them, they'll still be here before you leave. And if you want to take a look at those booklets, please feel free to come on over.